Perfect. Brilliant. So thank you everybody for coming today. Really lovely to see you all. We're going to be talking today about the Safe Accommodation grant funded by the Greater London Authority and MOPAC. First of all, for a bit of context, I'm Callum Stubbs. I'm from the London Community Foundation. I'm joined today by my colleague, Sam, who's also in the room and will be presenting later on.
Hi, everyone.
Sam Smallcup, there we go. As well as Shabana Kawsar from the GLA, and I believe Michaela's here as well, also from the GLA. And then we have Aisha Graham Sharif, hopefully from MOPAC. Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to run down a little bit of background of who the LCF is. We're then going to pass over to Shabana and Aisha, hopefully, to talk a little bit of background of who the GLA are and MOPAC. And then we're going to hear from myself and Sam in a bit more detail around what this fund involves and the process to apply. Okay, so first of all, some of you may already know, but for those of you that don't, the London Community Foundation is a specialist support organisation that effectively links up donors with the charitable sector. So it's a donor-advised model, and we manage currently around 60 different funds on behalf of a range of different donors. So in this case, for example, the public sector, but as well as the corporate sector and also high net worth individuals and philanthropists. In the financial year that ended in March 2021, we awarded over 22.6 million through over 1,321 grants. And as you can imagine, over half of those grants were emergency COVID-19 response. I'm now going to hand over to, I believe, Shabana and Aisha, just to give us a little bit of background about who the GLA are, if you don't already know, and also who MOPAC are. So Shabana, can I hand over to you first of all?
Yeah, thanks, Callum. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Glad you're showing interest in this fund. So some of you may already know me. I'm Shabana. I'm the program manager based in the GLA, and I work on the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation, or DASA program. Just very briefly in terms of the GLA and MOPAC. I'll talk about GLA, and Aisha, you can come in on the MOPAC if you wanted to. You're probably already aware of it, but it's both GLA and MOPAC are bodies responsible for delivering strategic work under the Mayor of London. And as you know, the Mayor of London has an annual budget, and the work of the Mayor also includes sort of Transport for London, Metropolitan Police and London Fire Brigade. But with the GLA even, we're a devolved regional governance body, and we're responsible for the strategic administration across London. And really we look to aim to improve coordination between London local authorities. And then in terms of MOPAC, Aisha, shall I hand over to you? You there, Aisha? Oh, there you are. I can see you but not hear you. Oh, for some reason, we can't hear you, but I can see that you're not on mute. So I wonder whether there's an issue with your mic.
Do you have any headphones plugged in, Aisha? Anything like that?
I think it might be when you come into Zoom, sometimes it asks you for permission. Do you want me to just should I just do it? Yeah, I can see her nodding. So yeah, MOPAC, the organisation Aisha represents, again, some of you or most of you will be aware, is the Mayor's Mayor's Office of Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, and we work really closely, and they have a number of different priorities, including reducing and preventing violence, increasing trust and confidence, and better supporting victims of crime, and also protecting people from being exploited or harmed. And so the GLA is kind of like the local authority element, and MOPAC are like the borough command unit element, and we both work with the London Mayor. If you can go on to the next slide, because I think this is probably the more relevant bit for yourselves. The Mayor of London is committed to ensuring that survivors of domestic abuse are able to access safe accommodation, and that's regardless of whether they decide to stay in their home or if they leave. And again, most of you are probably aware that in 2021, the Domestic Abuse Act came into force, and under Part 4 of that Act, there's a duty on the Mayor to support survivors of domestic abuse and their children in safe accommodation. And so that duty includes undertaking a needs assessment, producing a strategy, and quite importantly, commissioning services off the back of the needs identified and that strategy. And so the new duty comes with government funding, and for 22-23, that was just over 20 million for London. So we've already commissioned a range of different services through that funding allocated to us by DLUC. But we are really keen to launch this particular fund, and I'm sure Callum and Sam will come on to talk more about that in detail, because we really understand the need to increase the level and quality of provision for survivors and their children. And then just really important to highlight that the duty sits with the GLA, but we are working very closely with MOPAC and the VORG team there in partnership on the activities involved in delivering the duty. So that is a very whistle-stop tour between us two. Aisha, you've got your hand up. Does that mean you can come in?
I'm hoping so.
Yes.
Can you?
I can hear you now. Hooray!
I'm so sorry. I've not used Zoom for a long time. But no, I just wanted to add to that as well. And thank you so much, Shabana, for doing that. And also just to say to some of the participants, also this fund came out of the engagement that was done to inform the strategy that Shabana's mentioned. So organizations such as yourselves and other voluntary sector organizations are the ones that have kind of informed the scope and the need for this fund as well. So yeah, for us, we're just really excited to kind of have something that's been informed directly by the sector and the community, and be able to launch it today.
Great, thank you. I think that's it from us. Callum, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll take it from here. Thanks. So as you've kind of just touched on, the idea behind this programme was that it was recognising that the physical and psychological quality of safe accommodation has an impact on the recovery of survivors and their children. So knowing that high quality safe accommodation provision can be a barrier for survivors in leaving abusive relationships, and a reason that they return to their abusers. So this programme has been set up to support applicants, focusing on improving the physical environment and social spaces of existing safe accommodation that are operated by London's domestic abuse sector. And just to emphasise, it does say existing safe accommodation. So it's not about creating new spaces, it's about making what's there higher quality. So some of the sorts of improvements that the fund can support are things like improving spaces to recognise that looking at the impact of the environment on wellbeing and behaviour. So looking at things like noise, light, comfort, temperature, fabrics, colours, and aesthetics. It can be used to create spaces which are safe and inviting for victims and survivors, and where the internal building is in a good state of repair, looks cared for and is fit for purpose, and for creating spaces which have fixtures and fittings that meet the needs of victims and survivors and their children. So those are the kind of improvements that the fund is looking to support. And moving on to the next slide. Thanks, Callum. So overall for this fund, the total budget is £750,000, and the grants that are available are, the grants that are available are between £10,000 and £100,000. There's quite a range depending on what it is that you want to do with it. The deadline for applications is midday on Monday, the 6th of March, and we're not able to accept applications submitted after that. I would really recommend, if you are applying, trying to get your application in before that midday deadline, just to make sure if you have any technical hitches, you can get those ironed out and phone us up for support, because it does happen sometimes. We get a lot of panicky phone calls at 5 minutes to midday. So if you can try and submit before then, all the better. And the fund is only open to one application per organisation, and that's even if you are managing multiple accommodation spaces. It's per organisation, and the grant should the work you're doing should be over a maximum of 12 months from when you receive the grant, and the work can start from May, so you'll be notified by the end of April as to the decision on your application. So you can begin work from May. And just to say, large-scale capital projects are not eligible for support under this funding. That's not what it's designed for. And as I said before, it does need to be existing spaces. The other thing to say about kind of the accommodation is, because we've had a few questions around it, it is residential accommodation, so day centres and things aren't eligible for this pot. It is around residential accommodation. And then, so the other element of this is that the funding is only available to London-based services that are already taking a psychologically informed approach to managing their existing safe accommodation. Psychologically informed environments or psychologically informed services are those designed and delivered in a way that considers the emotional and psychological needs of the individuals using them and the people who are working in them as well. So applicants to the fund must be able to demonstrate that they're operating a psychologically informed approach. And we'd be looking for them to demonstrate that they've got in place a psychological framework, that they're thinking about the physical environment and social spaces, that they've got good staff training and support in place, that they're managing those relationships and evaluating outcomes. So those are the sort of 5 elements of the psychologically informed environment that we'd be looking for applicants to demonstrate. And then the next slide is, this is the last bit on the sort of the priorities of this particular funding. So we've said for this fund that preference will be given to organisations which are led by and are for communities experiencing inequity. And I'm going to go through kind of how we've defined that for this fund. So for this fund, by and for organisations are defined as small grassroots organisations with a maximum turnover of 1.5 million that are rooted in and led by the communities that they serve. And just to be clear, that 1.5 million, that's not an income threshold for anyone applying to the fund. That's just to be given preference as a by and for organisation, that we're considering that to be organisations under 1.5 million. So in terms of what we mean by communities, we're not just talking about like a physical area. We're looking at communities of survivors who may or may not live in the same area, but are connected by their social identity and shared concerns. So for example, a community of disabled women or a network of Black and minoritized survivors of violence against women and girls. And the final criteria to meet that being led by and for prioritisation is at least 80% of trustees and staff are from the protected characteristic that the organisation aims to work with. Again, just to reiterate, all of those things will give preference to organisations which meet that definition of being led by and for, but that doesn't mean this funding is exclusively for organisations that define as led by and for. Thanks. And back to you, Callum, I think now.
Yes, no, thank you, Sam. So that was in terms of the fund-specific criteria. Now I'm going to touch a little bit on the London Community Foundation's core eligibility criteria as well. So first of all, eligible legal structures. We will require you, if you do choose to apply, to submit signed governing documents, and that you are a company limited by guarantee, a registered charity, or a CIC in particular, as well as community benefit associations. But I should also highlight that for this particular fund, local authorities are also eligible to apply if they're directly running refuges as well. In terms of governance, we require at least 3 unrelated trustees/directors to be listed on the Charity Commission or Companies House, as well as up-to-date submissions with whichever regulatory authority you use, and at least 2 years of net current assets are visible. In terms of the bank account, we require that the bank account is obviously in the name of your organization, and there are at least 2 unrelated signatories related to that bank account. In terms of the safeguarding, we do obviously require that you have a up-to-date safeguarding policy and that it's been reviewed within the last 2 years. In relation to if you previously had LCF funding, one of the requirements in regards to that is there's obviously no overdue conditions, or we're not any outstanding monitoring. So I would just double check that before if you do choose to apply and you've had funding from us recently. And then this final point probably won't apply in this particular case, but we will only consider organisations with funding or income, I should say, of more than £5,000 at the point of application. Who and what is not eligible? So ineligible legal structures includes companies that are limited by shares, NHS bodies and cooperative associations in this particular case. In terms of what the grant can't be used for, it can't be used to promote religious or political activity, it can't be used for profit, and it also can't be for personal benefit as well. You can't use the funding for retrospective costs, so for spending that's already happened prior to when the grant started. And then finally, there is a point around we can't fund activities that exclude people on a basis of a specific religion, sexual orientation, gender, or ethnicity. But obviously, in this particular case, there is a focus on women, so we do understand that in this particular fund. In terms of how to apply, the really kind of key question, you want to go to our website. So that's londoncf.org.uk. So obviously londoncf.org.uk. So this is where all the information we've presented today. I appreciate it's a lot to take in right now. So you can see everything that we've said right now, also written down on the website for you to kind of go away and absorb separately if that's how you absorb information. And also to start the process, we have in the top right-hand corner on our website, the apply button, which shows you all of our available grants. You can filter it for all the ones that are open currently, and then you will see this fund listed. You'll submit your email address, and then we'll send you a link to an online web portal where you can start completing your application. And you don't have to do it all in one go. You can go away from it, come back to it. Obviously, the key message is make sure you complete it by the 6th of March, that midday deadline Sam mentioned earlier. But you can kind of work on it at multiple different times throughout the day or week or whenever you're working on it. So you don't have to sit down in one chunk and do it. And if you do choose to apply, I've touched on it in terms of our eligibility criteria. And so you will have to submit these documents as part of our checks to make sure you're eligible for any LCF funding, and particularly for this funding stream. So that will obviously be your signed organisation's governing documents, your safeguarding policy, will require your annual accounts from your last completed financial year, as well as your forecast for your current financial year. So we have some idea of your income and expenditure. We'll also need to see evidence of your public liability and your employer's liability insurance. And then finally, your financial regulations, so including procurement rules as well. And now back to Sam to talk about the ins and outs of the actual process.
Thanks, Callum. I'll try not to go too much over the same ground. So obviously Callum's already shown you where you find the guidelines. And on our website, I would recommend reading those through really carefully before starting an application and checking you meet all the fund priorities. As Callum's already mentioned, you can click through the link to our online application portal and you'll enter your email address and you should be sent a unique link to your form. You can also share that so multiple people can access the form and have and look at it if you want anyone else to review it for you. If you don't get the email, sometimes they go to junk. So if you don't get one straight away with the link, then check your junk mail. And if you don't, then just give us a call and we can help you out. And then, yeah, it's an online application form. It's fairly straightforward to complete. But if you have any problems, do call the team. We all are pretty good at fixing issues. I would suggest, especially for the long text answers though, drafting them in a Word document and saving them separately, just in case there's ever any issues, any problems with saving. But you can save it as you go along and should be able to keep accessing it throughout the process. But as a safeguard, always a good idea to avoid losing all your information. Once you've completed it, once the 6th of March is passed, we will double check all the applications and check eligibility, and that will be looking at the eligibility criteria that Callum's already gone through, and also checking that all of your documents have been submitted. And I would say I'm aware for this fund we've got quite a lot of documents that we don't normally have that you need to submit. So if you have any questions about those, or if you have any issues with uploading them, at the end of the presentation we've got the email address, the applications@londoncf.org.uk email address. If you have any problems with uploading documents, you can always send them to that email address, and we will help you out by uploading those. So if you have any problems, please do that, because when we get to those eligibility checks, we don't always have time to go back to you. Quite often, if the documents aren't there, then that means the application isn't progressed to the next stage. So we do a shortlisting process based on the priorities that I talked through a bit earlier. And then LCF will conduct assessments and due diligence checks on all of the applications that have been shortlisted. And at that stage, you may be contacted by one of our assessors to get a bit more information. But you may not be, so it doesn't mean anything either way if you have or haven't been contacted. And then we've got a decision-making panel, which will be held on the 10th of April, and that's when we should be making decisions. And we will then notify you before the end of April as to the outcome of your application. And if you've been successful, you'll be sent an offer letter with all the terms and conditions of the grant, and you'll be asked to review those and to sign it within 14 days. And again, it's an easy sort of online process going on to accept the grant. And you just need to upload a bank statement so that we know where to pay the grant to. And then, as I said before, activities can begin from the 1st of May.
Great, thank you, Sam. And so in terms of reporting, if you've been successfully awarded funding, monitoring will be every quarter, and then obviously an end of grant monitoring form will be sent to you as well. When you're awarded the grant and the initial offer letter and you've kind of signed and returned that, we will then send you the link to outline what is involved in the monitoring, so you can get your head around what exactly will be required in the monitoring process right from the start of the grant, so you're aware of what you need to be kind of capturing and the monitoring requirements. There will also be reminders throughout that period, so you won't miss deadlines and not be aware of it. We will make sure that you are kind of reminded that these things are upcoming, where if there's anything overdue, we can also kind of follow up with you in that as well. Okay. Just really briefly, I'm sure a lot of you are very experienced in terms of applying for grant funding, but just some top tips we always think is helpful just to refresh you whenever you're thinking about applying for new funding. We always think it's helpful to be quite clear and concise in terms of why you think you're the best fit for this particular funding stream, but also what your aims are as an organisation and why you are best placed to kind of do this work. To also demonstrate that you have a good understanding of the groups that you're working with, both your direct community and also the wider kind of stakeholders and wider relevant organisations that you're working with. Just to outline what your kind of impact targets are, but also how you plan to meet those aims and targets, and your expertise to kind of achieve those goals. To mention about realistic and achievable timelines, so it gives us an idea of exactly when you think that certain things will be happening and what experience you have around achieving those aims. And then finally, just some evidence of the need in terms of why you're originally addressing this particular focus. As a shout out to our resources page, this is really useful more for the wider organisational considerations. So on that page I mentioned earlier in terms of applying for funding, there's also another option within that drop down, which is about resources. That has lots of different helpful links and information around fundraising, impact measurement, all sorts of different areas. And it can be quite useful just for refreshing, maybe areas you kind of already know, but you just want a quick refresher, or for some gaps, if maybe you've highlighted there's certain things you want to work on. It's a good place to get some external resources and kind of learn a bit more about how to do certain approaches for your organisation. So just a quick mention of that page. And then finally, just to keep up to date, we do have a newsletter. So just a quick mention here, our comms team's asked us to mention this, and it's a good place to see what funding is available. So this particular funding is obviously promoted there, as well as other different funding streams that come and go throughout the years as we promote those. So it's a really good place to be kept up to date with everything that LCF is working on. Okay, I appreciate that's a lot of information to absorb very quickly, and I can see there's a hand gone up straight away. So yes, any questions? And I think that's Caroline, hot off the mark.
It is, thank you. I've got a few questions if that's okay. The first one is, are applications welcome from organisations with an income above 1.5 million? I know the preference is for smaller organisations, but there's a big difference between national organisations that deliver domestic violence services and one who perhaps has an income of 3 million. That's the first question. The second question is, could the funds be used to make an adaptation for disabled access into a refuge space, if that's capital cost? And the third one, is there a long application? Because there's 6 days to complete it, 6 working days, and that's a really short time scale. Thank you. I think that's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. Sam or Shabana, did you want to kick off on those questions?
Yeah, I can come in. Shall we stop sharing the screen just because it'd be nice to see people's faces?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So in your first question was, is it open to organizations who have more than 1.5? Yeah, absolutely. It's open to all. I think it's just a recognition that smaller organizations sometimes kind of miss out on the opportunity, and so it was good to kind of set a preference. But yeah, it's not just provided for, it's much wider than that. Your second question around accessibility, that sounds fine. That sounds like what this program's for. It's about making refuges more accommodating and more sort of environmentally friendly and safe. I know Aisha's here as well. I don't know if Aisha, you want to chip in on that particular point. Maybe we can also have an offline conversation around exactly what you had in mind. I mean, I suppose if it was building, a brand new suite, maybe that might be something which we need to speak about. But if we're talking about modifications and making it more accessible, that sounds like it sort of fits within the remit of this work. Yeah, Aisha just said she's agreed, so that's good. And then your third question, whenever there's 3 questions, I always forget the third one. Remind me what you asked. Sorry, Caroline.
If this has to come in on the 6th of March, then there's 6 working days to complete it. So is there a really lengthy application form with 1,000 words per question?
So, no, hopefully not. I think we really, well, I think maybe Sam kind of might be best placed to answer the question around how many questions there are. The fund itself did launch about 3 weeks ago, so it was we were just holding this Q&A because it's something which we thought would be helpful, but it did launch a while back, so appreciate that it's quite tight from now until the deadline, but it was definitely announced before. And in terms of the questions, I remember seeing the form. Callum or Sam, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I don't think it's very similar to our kind of, I don't know if you've applied for other LCF forms, but we try and keep them fairly consistent. So I think there's maybe 4 or 5 kind of long text questions, and then short questions and a budget. I think it probably, so, and we try and limit them to, normally they're around 250 words max, maybe 300 words, but yeah, I appreciate anything takes time to complete, and yeah, I would just say as an assessor, and I say this to people all the time, like, I know it's really hard not to, but just not agonizing over every word that goes into the box, not spending, make sure it's clear, but if we need more, we'll come back to you. We're not looking for it to be kind of perfect, poetically written things, just straightforward that we can tell what you actually want to do with it, and please don't spend hours and hours crafting perfect prose.
Thanks.
Brilliant. I can't tell the order of the hands, but should we go for Ruth next?
Hi, thank you. I'm going to keep my camera off because my connectivity isn't great. But I've also got a few questions, if it's okay. So we're inquiring about a potential application from a housing association. So we support various individuals, some of whom do come from the domestic abuse, well, have suffered domestic abuse. So would that be eligible, or would all of the individuals we support be expected to have undergone domestic abuse? So that's one question. I also wondered if it would be possible to have some insight into the success rate, because following on from Caroline's query about income, our income is also over the 1.5 million. And I'm also conscious that our leadership isn't predominantly BAME. So I don't know if there is a scoring chart or something along those lines that gives some insight into how applications are scored, and yeah, the success rate of applications for other funding streams would be helpful, because then it will help us assess if it's worthwhile us spending time on the application. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Sam, did you want to field some of those questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Shemana is best placed to answer about, particularly about housing associations prioritising. In terms of scoring, I think we will have a shortlisting framework, and we will be looking at those things that I mentioned around kind of the led by and for. But I don't know what. It's difficult to know the success rate because we've not run this fund before. Unfortunately, I can't say last time we got this many applications and this many were successful, and it does really vary according to what the fund is as to how many applications we receive. Some of the funds we hold have a much higher success rate than others. So I'm afraid it's quite difficult to answer that at this stage. But yeah, there will be. I haven't got a shortlisting framework that I can share at this stage, but that will be one of a number of things that we'll be looking at as part of the shortlisting process. Sorry, I'm not sure that's not not the most helpful answer. I don't know. I think is correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a fair point, because it also depends on what's coming through. You know, if there's 7 bid for 100, or if there's lots of smaller ones, that all kind of changes the game. But just that we're really keen to make this as accessible to as many different applicants as possible, because we know that this is needed. And I think, as Aisha said at the start, this has come as a direct response to requests from the sector. So really keen for people not to be deterred and to apply. But also for Aisha and myself, if this is a fund that's very heavily subscribed, that's something which we can take away. And as I mentioned, this is part of the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation programme, and this is an ongoing piece of work. And so, we're really keen to kind of revisit, review, think about this going forward. So it will be helpful for us for sure. In terms of housing associations, so it's open to local authorities, housing associations, and sort of charities, but it does have to be sort of domestic abuse safe accommodation. So it kind of depends on, and it might be we have a conversation outside to kind of maybe better understand your organisation in a bit more detail. But we are looking for it to be, aimed at victims and survivors of domestic abuse, as opposed to a kind of generic housing or accommodation space. That's kind of the sort of criteria of this, because it sits under the domestic abuse safe accommodation duties that the mayor has. Again, I might not have answered your question because I'm not 100% familiar with your organisation, but if you do get in touch, we can kind of maybe have a bit more of a conversation to find out about your where you're coming from.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was, I think it was an understanding of if, because the individuals we support are from, so many different walks of life, and if we had to be, I suppose, a solely domestic abuse organisation, but it sounds like we don't. But the provision in which we were applying for would have to support individuals who'd undergone domestic abuse, which is what we would be applying for. But yeah, thank you. Maybe another catch-up would be helpful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ruth. Should we go Rosalind and then Tamina?
Hi, I'm from the Invisible Cafe. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay, cool. From the Invisible Cafe, and we support people with invisible illnesses and disabilities. And the way that we work is we offer classes, weekly classes, Monday to Friday, 11 till 12:30, that support people's well-being and mental health. And it's not necessary. I mean, we say people with invisible illnesses and disabilities, we don't know their background. So they're only here for an hour and a half each day. But what they take away from that is a safe space to be creative, to meet people like-minded, have a coffee, just chill for 90 minutes, do some yoga, or, you know, and just carry on with their day, or do another class, art, crafting, anything. And I just wanted to know if that was something that LCF would support, you know, in that, would I be able to apply for a grant in that for this, my project? I mean, we've been running for 2 years.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalind. It sounds like a really amazing work, definitely.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if this fund particularly might be the best fit for that sort of work, but earlier I was mentioning about the other funds that we have, so you can always keep an eye, especially that newsletter I mentioned as well, keep an eye out on what other funds we have that might be maybe a slightly stronger fit with your focus of your work. But thank you, it sounds really, really amazing work. I don't know if Sam or Shabana wanted to add anything on that.
Thank you.
No, yeah, just to echo that, it sounds brilliant and much needed. So that's so great to hear. But yeah, because this is looking more at sort of the safe accommodation, I think Callum said around looking at the different options and what's available would be more appropriate.
Okay, thank you so much. And is there any way I can plug can I send you details of the Invisible Cafe that you can share around? Can I do that? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, pop a link in the chat. It's always good to get, you know, to find out about brilliant services.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. And this is an amazing opportunity. So well done for that. You know, thank you, Sadiq Khan.
Thank you.
And you guys, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. And then I think that's lastly but not least, Tamina.
Yeah, hi. My questions are more about sort of looking at the application form. There are just a few things that I'm not too sure about. In the bank signatories box, it says provide all bank signatories and their addresses. I just wanted to clarify, like, because obviously you said minimum 2 unrelated, but say we have like 12. Do you want all 12 and then their addresses? Is that email addresses? Presumably so. Do you want their home addresses? Well, just clarification around that.
Yeah, sorry, Sam, were you going to go?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I think if you can demonstrate you've got 2, that's 2 unrelated, that's fine. You don't need to give addresses for 12 of them. Yeah, I think some of the things like that, because our application form is normally used for small organisations, I think we would normally expect them to provide them all. But if you're talking about 12, that's a lot. We would normally ask for home addresses, just because one of the things we look at is just to verify they're not living in the same. You know, they may have different names, but be living under the same roof. So we do normally ask for home addresses, but just for 2 of them is fine.
Okay, all right. And then I just had another question, which was, so in the part about where you're going to operate the services, you can only pick one borough. What if you've got services across London or several boroughs? What are you supposed to do then?
I will have a look at that. That shouldn't be like that. So you should select all of your boroughs. So that maybe, I don't know, I'll check if that's unique to you. Well, what's the name of your organisation, sorry? It's
Refuge.
Refuge, okay. I will double check if that's something that's gone wrong in your form or something that I need to change across all of the application forms.
Yeah, it's just like a little drop down. So
you should be able to select.
No, I mean, at least I can't. I don't know about anyone else, but
what borough did it just give you one borough to select?
No, it gives you like, you could select any of the London boroughs, but you can only select one.
Okay, I might be thinking about. Okay, in that case, if you just select the borough that your office is based in or that your accommodation is based in, that's fine.
Well, yeah, the accommodation is kind of maybe more than one, but should we go with the office and then say somewhere else that would be like across London or something like that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. Right, thank you so much.
And I think just to add to that, Tamina, what you then could do is in the actual content of the application, just mention the other boroughs that if you do operate in multiple, just mention those separately.
Sure.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
noticed another hand has come up. Anna Jane.
Hi, yeah, sorry for the last minute hand. I just wanted to check. So obviously, I know you said that local authorities are eligible. Is it just if we provide our refuges kind of directly as the local authority, or does it include kind of other forms of accommodation that we might be able to provide? So if we were providing, say dispersed accommodation that was single sex for victims of domestic abuse, would we be able to apply for this funding to improve the fabric of that?
So it covers all sort of domestic abuse safe accommodation in its broadest sense of the definition. I can, in fact, it might, I'm just thinking, Callum, it might be helpful just to kind of have a list of what we mean by safe accommodation, just so that's clear. But yeah, it covers a range of different safe accommodation spaces within.
Yeah, and I mean, where would local authorities fall on the kind of PIE aspect of it? Because obviously we don't really kind of work in a psychologically informed way necessarily. Would it be better, I mean, you know, because a local authority has got lots of different types of support services, so how does that work for us if we were applying for funding?
So I think what would be helpful is to, because with a psychologically formed environment, it's not necessarily, like a badge or a kind of accreditation process. It's more of a kind of cultural approach. And I suppose it kind of goes back to how your different spaces are being managed, and how they're being run. And are they kind of run with the values of the psychologically informed environment, and how you're able to evidence that in an application form. In the prospectus that's been circulated, it kind of lists what a psychologically informed environment looks like, because there are some local authorities that do work and do adopt the PIE approach. So it's actually just sort of looking at what that sort of term means, and how you can evidence that your safe accommodation provision is aligned with that, or is working sort of underneath those headings.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Are there any more questions or anything else people wanted to clarify right now? No. Brilliant. Okay, and I will circulate the slides after this. I noticed that was a question within the chat. At the end of the slides, there is an email, application@londoncf.org.uk. So if something comes to you tomorrow or next week that you really wanted to ask, feel free to drop that email a question as well, so you can clarify in more detail there. So I think that's everything.